In this video I'm going to talk about a sort of advanced animation lesson and also a recap of what I've been getting up to with this. I want to show you this process that I went through to make this shot, and also there are some things on my mind about software that I want to talk about. I want to share my opinions on it. I've been getting into what you might call advanced 2D animation territory with this shot, so I wanted to share my learning experience with you. I've done a similar thing like this in a previous video where I broke down one of the hardest scenes that I've made, and I explained why it was difficult and how I overcame that difficulty. So I'm going to recap some of the standout scenes I made for Sam Calder in this video. He's a filmmaker and he has a really inspiring YouTube channel which you should definitely check out. I'll leave the link to that in the description as well. So let me start with talking about the software here. I believe that a true pro is not loyal to any software. A real pro uses the tools available to him, assesses what each tool is most effective at, and freely moves between tools to get the most out of each of them. It's not about what software is good, what software is bad, or what software is up to date with whatever trend. It's about choosing the right software for the job. Sometimes it's just not worth investing in learning an entirely different software if it is just for one job, or if you have a short turnaround to get it finished. And also, it's not necessary to stay up to date with all the latest software unless if you're working for a studio and that studio decides to use that software, then yes it is. But you have to choose what software is right for you. And that happens from understanding the software, understanding what the software is good at and what the software is not so good at. And sometimes this also means splitting up your process across multiple different software. I used TV Paint for most of these scenes on this commission, but for some special scenes I took it back to Flash because of some specific features which I was able to harness within Flash. In this particular shot, there was this character going through different parallaxing environments. Now, I love TV Paint, but it's got one fatal flaw with it. It erases everything which is outside of the stage, and this is just not a feasible way to work if you have a parallaxing shot like this. It's great for character animation and things like that, but for parallaxing shots and those kind of things where you need camera movement and things moving out of the frame, it's just really difficult to work with TV Paint on a shot like that. So as well as this, I needed to work with placeholders, so I would quickly sketch in one of the foreground elements, but then I'd want to update it later. I'd want to animate it now and then update what is inside that later. And that is just much easier to do within Flash because they have this symbol system. You could do it in TV Paint, but it would be very messy. And Flash enables you to do motion tweenings and use symbols, and you can go back to those symbols and make adjustments whenever you like, which is perfect. So that's what I ended up using for this long shot. It's one of the only shots in the film that is done mostly in Flash, with other bits of it done in Photoshop, and I'm glad that I did that. And really, I was able to integrate them pretty well. If you look very closely, you can tell that this shot is done in Flash and the others are done in TV Paint, but I think it's fine because of the colors and everything. The style is the same. It's just that if you look very closely, you can tell that it's with vector brush, but it didn't matter really. So for this shot, this shot was really interesting. I realized I needed to have quite advanced character animation. I filmed some reference for it, and I knew what I wanted to do with the movement of the character, but then on top of that there was quite a lot of complex fabric movement which should be on ones because it's going very fast. The wind speed is very fast here. So I was wondering how to do this, and I remember back to a study I made of Bahi JD, and I looked at the way Bahi JD made his rough animation, and I was really interested in what I found. Bahi JD has a method of asset replacement, which I think allows him to make his rough animation very high quality and within a fairly reasonable time frame. Also, to make it even easier for my studying, he color coded different features of the body, and he kind of lets them go off on their own motion path. They're moving freely of the main body, and then he sort of joined them up later. And this gives the body movement an overall complexity which I find very appealing, and I think it looks very complex and very rich with detail. And I knew how I could do this in Flash as well. And it just so happened that Bahi JD also used Flash. Flash is very suited to doing this because of the symbols system. Using the Flash symbols made it easier for me to create this myself. See how both of these hands move independently of each other, not just in the motion path but also in the timing. And that builds up this complexity of character animation. I actually separated those hands out onto their own timelines, used my intuition to get the movement, and also studied my reference footage where I filmed myself bracing for impact. I used frame by frame animation to join the hands together. I figured the hands and the head were the main sort of leaders of this movement. They're the ones where I wanted to have that freedom to move them about independent of the main body. And then I used the layer of the main body with frame by frame animation to sort of link every one of them up on every frame. That's basically a summary of how I made the first pass of the animation. This is without any of the clothes and without the hair on top. The second pass was where I would handle the hair and the clothes separately. So I exported this character animation from Flash in the way that it is, this rough character animation, and then I imported it into TV Paint. Once I had it in TV Paint, I then created a layer above that and had that on ones. And on that layer, I traced over the main form that I had established in the first pass, and I drew frame by frame the clothing and all these very complex sort of ripples and creases in the clothing and these sort of wave motions that you see. And that kind of stuff was a lot more complex than what I could have done in a single pass. So this is why it was really important for me to have a 2-pass system for this one, but normally I get away with having a 1-pass system, which is a lot less time consuming. On shots that count, I will sometimes use a 2-pass system if I think it will be more effective and if I think it's necessary. If it isn't necessary, then I won't do a 2-pass system, I'll do a 1-pass system, and I'll actually rough out the animation, clean up my original keyframes and in between those keyframes, and that will be the whole animation. Having the main character animation on 2s and 3s, and then having the clothing animation and hair animation on top of that be on 1s, you'd think that that wouldn't necessarily work, that it would create some kind of noticeable difference, but it actually didn't. It actually worked just fine. On the go, I also developed a few other tricks that I'll show you in this clip here, where I actually recorded this as I was going through it to demonstrate what I was working out for the hair. The hair could have been very complex to do, and it was on 1s as well, so there were a lot of drawings. So I was looking for ways to speed up that process, but to still have that complexity of having wave motion, complex wave motion in all of the hair at the same time. So I'm going to show you how I managed to do that here. Well, my microphone broke in this scene, so I'm going to try and dub what I was explaining here. So the hair and things are moving in this gale force wind. On top of that, you have some quite complex character animation going on. He's kind of shielding himself from the wind, and I'm just doing the hair in this shot. So the character is moving and I have this extra layer above, but the head is doing its own thing. It's moving as well. So we have this complex 2D hair animation, but we've got to have a moving head and also not make it look like the hair is on a repeat cycle, because that doesn't look very natural. The head is also changing angles just to make things a bit more tricky. And so with TV Paint, I've been using this little feature for certain parts of the hair and for other things, but in this case it's for the hair. I basically made an animation brush. It looks like this. I just took one frame from the character animation first to know where the head was for reference, and then I just quickly animated this one moving bunch of hair which moves in the direction of the wind. Then I turned that little piece of animation into an animation brush. So if I do that here down the side, I can stamp in one frame of hair after another. And you can see that it actually moves through the animation of the hair with each stamp that I make. So there in the corner is a little preview of that. Actually, you probably can't see that from this recording very clearly, but I can basically just scrub through which frame it starts on, and then it will move through progressively from there. As I run through each of the frames, there are 16 frames, and every frame I stamp, it automatically moves onto the next frame in the sequence. So look at that, it's really cool. I really like this feature of TV Paint. It still takes time, but it certainly speeds things up so I can just focus on tracking the hair onto the head. So I'm moving through. I'm just in the middle of doing these strands on the top of the head, and there's a bit at the back here, so I stamp here and it moves on to the next one. I roll forward onto the next frame and continue that through until I reach the end of the animation. It's very satisfying to just stamp these bits in place. And I just move the brush and pinpoint the main place where I want it, the idea being that the root of the hair will be tracked to the same point on the head. Because this is a mid shot, the hair doesn't need to be all that precise in its placement. It's quite forgiving in that way. Like if you zoom out, you can see you just get the idea of it without it needing to be too neat. Yeah, all of the ones on the top are basically the same piece of animation but with offset timing. So it looks super complex, but it's actually not that complex. So if I scrub through, you can see how I've animated a bunch of hair on the top of that head, and I've probably done it in a faster space of time than if I were hand drawing those clusters. There were bits of hair on the side of the head that had to be animated differently, but I think I got almost all of the top of the head with this custom brush method. Some of the other pieces on the side of the head had to be drawn differently, so this definitely seems to knock quite a lot of time off. So I'm pretty chuffed with that feature of TV Paint. I'm glad I thought of using it for that purpose instead of just steaming ahead with just hand drawing them all individually. So yeah, to conclude, this one in particular had some interesting challenges, but it was a lot of fun to do, and I think the result of it is very satisfying to watch. When you're talking about software, remember that software is just a tool, and you need to treat it like a tool, really. You need to see what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of this software. Let me use the strengths and I'll use a different software for the weaknesses here. Some people who talk about software, I just have this problem with them giving too much credit to software. I know I've been talking about software in this video, but I just want to say that you shouldn't treat it like the software is everything about it. I've heard this a few times, and one person I even heard referring to, they were talking about OpenTunes, and I think they were talking about why OpenTunes is really good, and they said that OpenTunes made Howl's Moving Castle. And this really annoyed me, because what an insult to the artists, the talented artists who put all their creativity into Howl's Moving Castle. Without the artists, the software does nothing. It creates nothing. The software is a tool. Studio Ghibli and all of the people working there made Howl's Moving Castle. So a good artist uses software. They're not loyal to a software. They don't feel pride for a certain software they use. In my past, I said I was quitting Flash. I've gone back on that now. I didn't quit Flash. I just stopped using it as my main software. But in cases like this, when Flash is the correct software to use, I will use Flash. And the same goes for any of my software. I use it when it's an appropriate time to use that. So I hope that more people adopt a similar approach, and I hope more people have the attitude that software by itself does absolutely nothing, and really we should be giving credit to the artists who made it. I would invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, if you like these kind of videos about animation. And if you're interested, you can support me on Patreon, and the link to that will be in the description as well. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.